Well, folks, it's finally here. Christmas Eve, that day you've either been dreading or so excited you could not wait for. But every year it seems to come earlier and earlier, doesn't it? Retailers try to find a way, one way or another, to add just a few more days to the season, to squeeze out every drop of Christmas spirit that they can. And even though there's this kind of unwritten rule that advertisers are supposed to start no earlier than 100 days out from Christmas, the past couple of years, those stores have found sneaky ways to try to remind you that the holiday season is coming quickly. Now, for me, it would seem 100 days is more than enough of Christmas to handle. For me, really, I can't even get into the Christmas spirit till at least after Thanksgiving, and even then, it still takes a few days. Perhaps it's the over-commercialization of all of it, or perhaps maybe the oversaturation of all that time spent pursuing stuff. Or maybe it's just a few extra days of turkey coma because I have so much turkey still in my system. But whatever the case, it seems that 100 days already feels like overkill when it comes to advertising for Christmas. And yet, if you take a look back through history, you'd be surprised to find that in the 18th and 19th centuries, 100 days really didn't seem so bad. Back then, they actually encouraged shoppers to get out as early as possible to do that Christmas shopping. What we came to find out was they wanted to avoid that 11th hour rush. And now here's an honest time of questions for you. How many of you still were shopping today to finish your Christmas list? I see a few sheepishly kind of, yeah, I was. That's what these early advertisers wanted to avoid, believe it or not. And I think it's actually interesting as you think about that because retail workers themselves want to spend what little energy they may have left with their families for this joyous time of the year. And especially with how retail workers sometimes get treated, it's no surprise that they want to try to make sure that there isn't such a late rush where everything just becomes chaos. But even back in the 18th and 19th century, they had nothing on advertising when it came to Christmas in the Bible. It may not have been for Rabbis R Us or Camel's Shack, but word of the coming birthday of God's Son was well on its day before the 100-day mark. As I mentioned just a little bit ago, God wanted to make sure everyone had plenty of time to prepare for this most joyous of days, and the Messiah is coming. So Isaiah started putting the word out about 700 years in advance. Talk about a long shopping time. Now, as is always the case with the prophets, Isaiah spoke to God's people in the midst of troubling times and rampant sin all around. But in order to give his people hope for the future, God sent Isaiah to speak to the best hope that he could offer. And while many were under the threat of invasion, they were hopeful for weapons, armor, chariots, maybe even more soldiers to help with settling them into a place where they could defend themselves against the looming threats around them. But instead, Isaiah surprises them all by saying that their best hope is found in a little baby. In Isaiah 9, chapter 9, verse 7, we hear about this little baby boy who would be one day a ruler upon David's throne, and he's going to be all these wonderful things for us. And while little babies don't make for great warriors, they do somehow represent hope for the future. Now, it seems odd to put our hope in the future into such an innocent, helpless, little newborn human. But that's exactly what Isaiah, the other prophets, and the Lord has given to us. Isaiah gives us many advertisements of just what we will get with the coming Christ child. And when he finally arrives, he is that and so much more. There is no bait and switch here. There's no false advertising. Jesus arrives as the tiny little child prophesied about in the manger on that special holy night in Bethlehem. And it's an image we're all very familiar with, probably. We see that nativity scene so many different places all around us. You may have seen it out in front of our building, or perhaps you have noticed it behind me here in front of the altar. But we're always, when we look at that nativity, we know what to expect there. A small barn-like structure with angels hovering above in their robes, shepherds flanking one side while the wise men with gifts stand upon the other, animals nestle near a kneeling Joseph and Mary, and all of them are focusing their gaze upon a feeding trough where a little baby lies quietly on the hay. But this baby is anything but safe. King Herod, despite all his evil and atrocious acts and responses to this news of this newborn king, he may actually have a little something to teach us along with the shepherds and the wise men. The silent night of which we sing belies the fact that Jesus came to conquer sin and death, and to call us from our life of idolatry and sinfulness to follow him. As we spoke about a few weeks ago in our regular worship time, Jesus won't show up exactly how we typically expect. Jesus will preach about a kingdom that has nothing to do with power, wealth, or military might, but everything to do with servanthood, sacrifice, and suffering. Indeed, he will act as though the kingdom was already becoming a reality around him. He will spend his time eating and associating with people on the margins of society, the sick, the poor, the outcast, the prostitute, the tax collector, of all people, while he rebukes the religious, the elite, the so-called insiders. He will challenge the powers of sin and death by taking them on directly, all the way to the cross. You can't defeat someone who wants nothing from the world, who practices what he preaches, and who is willing to die all at the same time while forgiving his tormentors. Such a person is dangerous to the status quo. And as King Herod thought, he needs to be removed. Now, there is indeed a beauty in the quiet stillness of this evening, isn't there? That is undeniable. And yet, as we celebrate such a tranquil time together, it bears noting that Christ does not stay quiet. This sleeping baby we worship didn't stand idly by on the sidelines of our lives. He does not want to be put in our back pocket or simply hung on the walls or sat on the front lawn as a nice decoration. Jesus wants to invade our reality with God's reality. During the past few weeks leading up to tonight, we talked about the prophets and all the good news and things that they had to share about this coming Messiah that remind us of that exact idea that he is coming with God's reality to insert into our own. As Jeremiah noted, he wants to be the life amongst our death. When all seems lost and there is no hope for a dead stump before us that is our lives, Jesus brings forth a sign of life and hope. As Malachi shows, he wants to purify and refine everything about us. In spite of how uncomfortable it can be to go through such a purifying force as Christ's, it cleans us. And it takes away all our impurities before God. It is a good thing, albeit a little uncomfortable. And as Zephaniah shared, there is a bright future when God's kingdom finally arrives in full. We wait and watch with excitement for ways to experience and share that kind of hope now for the future when all things are restored and redeemed in full. And as Micah tells us, Jesus comes to bring us peace, shalom. Not just an end to physical violence, as peace typically denotes in our day now, but a wholeness, a completeness to us. A wholeness in all that we are, which leaves us wanting nothing. Christ is our all and fixes what sin has broken. So may our Christmas be merry. Not because of anything except the gift of Jesus Christ, our shalom, our Redeemer, our salvation. And may our hope extend as a light into a dark world desperate to see something worth hoping for. Amen.